Why is Israel around as a country today? It seems almost impossible. After having lived in exile for the better part of 2,000 years, how is it that the Jews are still a distinct people with their religion and language? I don't know of any other people who have retained their culture after having been defeated and exiled for so long. The Hittites, they're gone, or have blended in with everyone else. Same is true for the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgasites, the Hivites, and all the other ites. They're all gone. The Egyptians are still around, but they were never exiled. So why does Israel exist? There are books and videos that explain the Balfour Declaration and all the other events that led up to Israel's recognition of a nation by the UN in 1948. But how did they persevere for so long? How did they remain distinct for so many centuries? It doesn't make any sense that the country itself has survived since 1948. Israel's the size of New Jersey. It's tiny, and it's surrounded by much larger nations who would love to wipe it off the map. Since 1948, it's been the underdog in many wars, and yet, every time, it's won. How do you explain that? It doesn't make any sense to me unless God is behind it. What else could it be? God was behind Israel's success when they escaped Egypt and entered the Promised Land. I believe He is behind their success today. Not because of anything they've done, but because of His covenant. Thousands of years ago, God made a covenant with Abraham, and later with his descendants, Isaac and Jacob. God made a solemn promise, a binding contract, and Genesis 17 records it. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you, and your descendants after you, for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of the descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you. And I will be their God. Notice that both the covenant and the possession of the land are everlasting. No expiration date. Now, at times God has removed His blessing from Israel and they've been forced from the land. But God has never voided His contract, nor will He. He won't go back on His word. So, Israel exists because they are the covenant people of God. I've always wondered how the Pharaoh of the Exodus could be so dense as to order his army into the Red Sea, which had just been parted before his very eyes, after he had seen the power of God over and over again before that through the plagues. What was he thinking? That he could take on God? Well, he lost. And ultimately, so will any person or country that takes on the people of God. It may look bleak for a while, but God always wins in the end. Let me say something about the people of God. Most mainline Protestant pastors believe that the church replaced the Jews as God's people, that the new covenant through Jesus invalidated the Abrahamic covenant. No, that's wrong. God was not playing fast and loose with the language when He said everlasting 4 times in Genesis 17. I think He meant what He said. Now, the Mosaic covenant, on the other hand, the covenant of the law, was not everlasting. And Hebrews 8:13 says that covenant is passing away. But the covenant God made with Abraham is still in effect. It was not replaced or superseded by the church. Romans 11 makes it clear that God is not done with the Jewish people. Speaking of Jewish Israel, Paul says, as far as the gospel is concerned, they are enemies for your sake. But as far as election is concerned, they are loved on account of the patriarchs, for God's gifts and his call are irrevocable. Just as you who were at one time disobedient to God have now received mercy as a result of their disobedience, so they too have now become disobedient in order that they too may now receive mercy as a result of God's mercy to you. For God has bound everyone over to disobedience so that he may have mercy on them all. Whew. This is a complicated passage, but within it is the promise that God's people, the Jewish people, will receive Jesus as their Messiah, and this will happen before he returns. Jesus, looking over Jerusalem, said to them, "You will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The Jews have to come back home for this to happen. That is why they exist. Israel is the withered fig tree that Jesus cursed because it had no fruit. And within 40 years, Jerusalem and the temple would be destroyed by the Romans. And Jesus is the fig tree in bloom that Jesus said would signal that summer is near. I believe they are God's alarm clock. And if this is true, Jesus will be returning soon.